You are the woman I choose, and with this ring, I want every future moment of my life to belong to us.
He gave his mistress the precious ring her mother left her. Then his billionaire wife made one silent move. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Share your country or city in the comments. Do you agree with the wife choosing silence in that painful moment, or would confronting them immediately have been the better choice? Please keep the discussion respectful. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay until the end. Your support helps us create more heartfelt stories about dignity, justice, healing, quiet strength, and overcoming betrayal. That ring belonged to my mother. Lenora Voss did not raise her voice, yet the words seemed to slip beneath the music and settle against the marble walls of the ballroom. Across the room, beneath a chandelier glittering like frozen rain, Callan Rourke was still on one knee. His tuxedo fit perfectly. His smile was bright enough for the cameras. In his open hand rested the sapphire ring Isolde Voss had worn through 3 decades of boardrooms, funerals, contract signings, and Sunday dinners. Now it gleamed beneath the ballroom lights as Callan lifted it toward Sabine Mercer. For one suspended second, no one moved. Then Sabine covered her mouth, her eyes filling with delighted tears as photographers leaned forward and flashes burst across the polished floor. Callan looked proud, not ashamed. He looked like a man presenting a prize he believed was his to give. Lenora stood near the left side of the ballroom, one hand wrapped around the stem of a champagne glass. Her deep navy gown caught the warm gold light in quiet waves, the lace at the neckline soft against her skin. She did not step forward. She did not call his name again. Her face remained still, almost empty, but her fingers tightened until the thin crystal stem pressed into her palm. Around her, guests shifted their attention between the proposal and the woman whose mother had once worn that ring. A violinist missed half a note. A waiter stopped beside a table of white roses. Someone near the stage whispered Lenora's name, then lowered their voice as if silence might hide the cruelty of what they were watching. Sabine extended her left hand. Callan slid the ring onto her finger with careful ceremony, adjusting it so the sapphire faced the cameras. The stone flashed once, dark blue and cold. Lenora knew the faint scratch along its setting. She had made it herself at 16 while borrowing the ring for a school dance, and her mother had laughed instead of scolding her. The memory came without warning. Isolde standing at the kitchen counter in bare feet, holding the ring beneath the light, and saying some things became more valuable after they carried a mark. Callan rose and kissed Sabine's hand. Applause began uncertainly, then spread through the room because people often clapped when they did not know what else to do. He glanced toward Lenora at last. There was no apology in his eyes, only a warning, polished and private, telling her not to ruin his moment. Lenora met his gaze for one measured breath. Then she looked directly toward the nearest camera, her expression unreadable, her shoulders relaxed, her lips closed. The hurt was there, buried deep enough that no one could claim it. So was the fury. She lifted the champagne glass, not to toast them, but to steady her hand. Callan turned back to Sabine, believing the silence meant surrender. He did not see Lenora place the glass on a passing tray. He did not see her reach for her phone. He only heard the applause growing louder while she stood perfectly still, waiting for the room to finish celebrating the mistake he had just made. Callan waited until the applause softened before crossing the ballroom toward her, his smile still fixed in place for the guests who had not yet stopped watching. Sabine remained near the stage, turning her hand beneath the chandelier as photographers captured the sapphire from different angles. Lenora could hear the faint click of shutters behind the music. She could also hear the careful rhythm of Callan's shoes against the marble, each step measured, as though he were approaching an employee who needed correction rather than the woman whose mother had worn that ring. He stopped less than 3 feet away. "Do not make this into something ugly," he said quietly. His voice was smooth enough that anyone nearby might have mistaken it for concern. Lenora looked past him toward Sabine's raised hand. The sapphire rested against pale skin, surrounded by diamonds. Isolde had chosen herself in a small Charleston jewelry shop nearly 20 years earlier. Lenora remembered sitting beside her mother at the glass counter, while Isolde rejected 3 newer settings because they looked too perfect. She had wanted the old marks preserved. Callan followed Lenora's gaze and gave a faint sigh. "It was sitting in a safe," he said. "No one was wearing it." The sentence landed more sharply than an accusation. Lenora brought her eyes back to his face. "How did you open the safe?" she asked. Nothing in her tone changed. Callan's jaw tightened for half a second, then relaxed. "We are married," he replied. "There should not be locked doors between us." Behind him, another burst of applause rose as Sabine embraced a woman from the marketing team. Callan glanced over his shoulder, checking that his moment was still unfolding without interruption. When he turned back, his expression had hardened. "Your mother has been gone for years, Lenora. That ring should be part of a living future, not buried with old grief." She did not answer. The words moved through her slowly, touching places she had spent years protecting. Isolde's hospital room, the folded letter beside the ring box. The last morning her mother had enough strength to fasten the clasp of her own bracelet. Lenora felt the champagne she had not drunk settle cold in her stomach. Callan leaned closer, careful not to touch her. "Sabine appreciates it," he said. "She understands what it means to be chosen." For the first time, Lenora noticed how rehearsed he sounded. Not nervous, not ashamed, prepared, as if he had imagined this conversation and decided her pain would be the price of his freedom. A few guests pretended to study the floral arrangements while listening. One elderly board member lowered his glass and watched Callan with a look that did not resemble approval. Lenora saw all of it without turning her head. "You used my mother's ring to propose to another woman," she said. Callan's smile disappeared. "Lower your voice." Lenora had not raised. That seemed to unsettle him more. She studied his face, the familiar lines around his mouth, the confidence built from years of standing beside her name and calling the view his own. Then she looked once more at the ring. Sabine was laughing through tears while a photographer adjusted her hand toward the light. Lenora's chest tightened, but her posture remained straight. "I asked how you opened the safe," she said. Callan looked toward the ballroom doors, then back at her. "This is not the place." "No," Lenora replied, almost gently. "It is exactly the place you chose." She reached into her evening bag and rested her fingers on her phone without taking it out. Callan noticed the movement. For one brief moment, something uncertain passed through his eyes. Then the orchestra changed songs, Sabine called his name, and he stepped away from Lenora as if the conversation had ended on his terms. She watched him return to the stage, watched him place a hand at Sabine's back, watched the cameras turn toward them again. Only then did Lenora remove her phone and open the security application connected to the private floor of their home. The access history appeared in clean white letters. One entry from 6 days earlier. Callan's code. 2:17 in the morning. Lenora read it once, locked the screen, and slipped the phone back into her bag. Across the ballroom, her husband lifted a champagne glass to celebrate the future he believed he had secured. Lenora remained where he had left her, silent enough for him to mistake restraint for defeat. The orchestra kept playing, but Lenora no longer heard the melody. She watched Callan laugh beneath the chandeliers while Sabine turned the sapphire toward another camera, and the ballroom slowly dissolved into another room, another year, another kind of light. She was 16 again, standing barefoot in her mother's kitchen on a humid Sunday morning, the windows open to the sound of cicadas and distant church bells. Isolde Voss had placed the ring on a folded linen towel beside a chipped coffee cup, treating the sapphire with more care than she gave the silverware and less ceremony than everyone else thought it deserved. Lenora had asked why she still wore something so old when she could afford anything she wanted. Isolde had smiled and held the ring beneath the window. "Because new things have never had to prove themselves," she had said. The setting carried tiny scratches along the gold. One came from a courthouse railing. Another came from a marble desk in Atlanta. The narrow mark beside the sapphire came from Lenora dropping it before a school dance and crying so hard that Isolde had laughed until tears filled her own eyes. She had not repaired the damage. She had called it history. Years later, after Lenora joined the family company, she learned the truth the ring carried beneath those marks. Isolde had worn it during the worst winter Voss Meridian had ever survived. A larger hotel group had tried to force the company into a sale, betting that a widowed black woman with unpaid loans and 2 unfinished properties would accept whatever terms were offered. Isolde had refused. For 6 weeks, she slept in her office, met lenders before sunrise, and sold nearly everything that did not belong to the trust. The sapphire ring became temporary collateral for a private bridge loan, that kept payroll moving and the Charleston property open. She bought it back 11 months later. On the same afternoon, the company posted its first profitable quarter. Lenora had been 23 when Isolde finally told her. It was never a symbol of being chosen by a man, her mother said. It was proof that I could choose myself when everyone expected me to surrender. In the ballroom, Lenora felt the memory settle against her ribs. Callan had never asked about the ring. He had seen it in portraits, in old company photographs, and once on Isolde's hand at their wedding, but he had never asked why she wore it. He understood value only when it could be displayed, financed, or attached to a name. Isolde had understood a different kind of worth. 3 months before her death, she summoned Lenora to the sunroom of the family house. Her hands were thinner then, but her voice remained steady. The ring sat between them in its dark blue box. Beside it was a sealed letter and a folder bearing the crest of the Voss Legacy Trust. Isolde slid the box across the table but kept one finger on the lid. "Do not wear this because you miss me," she said. "Wear it only when you remember who you are without me." Lenora had looked down, unable to speak. Isolde lifted her chin with a glance. "And never let anyone use it to speak for you." After the funeral, Lenora placed the ring in the private safe and left it there. She could not separate the stone from the smell of her mother's perfume, the soft rasp in her final breaths, or the empty chair at the head of the Sunday table. Callan had called the grief excessive. He had suggested selling some of Isolde's things because the house felt like a museum. Lenora had said no once, and he had let the subject drop. She understood now that he had not respected the boundary. He had simply waited until crossing it could benefit him. Across the ballroom, Sabine lifted her hand, while Callan whispered something that made her smile. The sapphire caught the light, revealing the faint scratch Lenora had made at 16. Her mother had refused to erase that mark because love, she said, should leave evidence without destroying what it touched. Callan had mistaken silence for absence, a locked safe for shared property, and grief for weakness. Lenora placed 2 fingers against the edge of her evening bag, feeling the outline of her phone beneath the fabric. She did not move toward him. She did not ask for the ring again. Isolde had taught her that power did not begin with reclaiming an object. It began with understanding what the other person had never been entitled to give away. 2 weeks before the gala, Lenora had first noticed the silence in Callan's messages. Not the silence between them, which had been growing for months, but the absence of ordinary details. No complaints about delayed flights. No photographs from hotel lobbies. No irritated notes about room service. His business trips with Sabine Mercer had become smooth, polished, and strangely empty, as though every visible part had been prepared in advance. The first crack appeared in a hotel invoice forwarded to Lenora by mistake. 2 suites had been booked. Only one had been used for room. Charges. Callan had ordered breakfast for 2 at 6:45 in the morning, then submitted the bill under executive development expenses. Lenora read the invoice once at her desk and set it beside a stack of property reports. She did not call him. She did not ask Sabine. She opened the internal travel records and followed the pattern. Napa, Aspen, Chicago. 3 cities in 8 weeks. Always adjoining reservations. Always one room collecting both meals. The evidence was not dramatic. It was administrative, quiet, and precise. That made it harder to dismiss. 3 nights later, while Callan slept beside her, his tablet lit on the dresser with a preview from Sabine. Lenora did not touch it. She did not need to. The message contained only 8 words, but they were enough. "I wish we did not have to pretend here." Lenora lay awake until dawn, listening to Callan breathe with the ease of a man who believed the walls still protected him. By morning, she had moved beyond the affair. Betrayal explained the distance, but not the urgency behind his recent meetings with investors. That afternoon, Merritt Sloan sent her a draft presentation for an acquisition Callan had been developing without formal board approval. The transaction involved a luxury resort group valued at $380 million. The opening pages were ordinary. Revenue projections, expansion maps, debt structure. Then Lenora reached the section titled Family Commitment. There, against a charcoal background, was a photograph of Isolde wearing the sapphire ring. Beneath it, Callan had written that the proposed deal carried the full strategic support of the Voss family and its legacy assets. Lenora stared at the page until the letters lost shape. The ring had not yet left the safe, but he had already begun using it. Not as jewelry, as evidence, as a symbol investors would recognize without asking what authority stood behind it. The next slide included a photograph from Lenora and Callan's wedding, cropped so tightly that Lenora's face was nearly gone while Isolde's hand rested visibly on Callan's shoulder. The caption described him as the trusted representative of the Voss family's next generation. Lenora leaned back in her chair. Outside the windows, Charleston rain moved across the harbor in pale sheets. Inside, the office remained still except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. She read every slide. Callan proposed using Voss Meridian's reputation to secure favorable financing while placing operational control in a separate company he would manage. Sabine's branding firm would receive a 7-year exclusive contract. Her name appeared in a footnote, clean and harmless, while the financial benefits gathered around it. Lenora printed the presentation and placed it in a blue folder. Then she opened the security log for the private floor of their home. At that time, the safe had not yet been accessed. The record was empty. She remembered resting her hand over the screen, feeling the first clear shape of his plan. He wanted the ring before the gala because he intended to turn a personal betrayal into a public claim. Sabine would wear it. Investors would see it. Photographs would circulate. By the time anyone asked whether Callan had the right to speak for the family, the image would already exist. That evening, he returned home carrying white lilies and asked why she had skipped dinner. Lenora looked at the flowers, then at the man holding them. He kissed her cheek and said the acquisition could change everything for them. She asked what he meant by them. Callan smiled as though the answer were obvious. The family, he said. Lenora accepted the lilies and placed them in water. She did not mention the invoice, the message, or the presentation. She only watched him loosen his tie and pour himself a drink in the kitchen her mother had designed. He believed her silence meant ignorance. In truth, she was giving him one final chance to stop before his ambition crossed from betrayal into theft. The morning after Callan brought home the lilies, Lenora drove to the oldest Voss property before sunrise. The hotel had not opened yet, and the lobby smelled faintly of polished wood, coffee, and the white gardenias arranged beneath Isolde's portrait. Thaddeus Wynne was waiting in the private library with a leather folder placed squarely before him. Merritt Sloane sat beside the window, reading glasses low on his nose, a tablet resting against one knee. Neither man offered sympathy. Lenora had not come for comfort. She placed the printed acquisition presentation on the table and opened it to the page carrying her mother's photograph. Thaddeus studied the image without touching it. Merritt read the caption twice, then removed his glasses. "Did you authorize this language?" he asked. Lenora shook her head. The room seemed to grow quieter. Thaddeus opened his folder and withdrew a copy of the Voss Legacy Trust. Isolde's signature appeared at the bottom of every amended page, dark and steady. He turned to a section marked in blue. The sapphire ring was listed by description, appraisal number, and provenance. It was not personal jewelry in the ordinary sense. Legal title remained with the trust, while Lenora held the exclusive right of possession and use. No spouse, officer, beneficiary, or representative could sell it, pledge it, gift it, display it for endorsement, or use its image to imply family authorization without written approval. Lenora read the paragraph slowly. "So even I cannot give it away," she said. "Not without a formal transfer approved by the trustees," Thaddeus replied. "Your mother designed it that way." Merritt turned the tablet toward her. He had compared Callan's presentation with internal authorization records. The acquisition team had used the words legacy-backed in 2 preliminary conversations with lenders. No funds had moved. No contract had been signed. But Callan had represented himself as acting with family support he did not possess. "That does not make the entire transaction fraudulent by itself," Merritt said carefully. "It does make the claim unauthorized, and it gives the board a duty to review every statement attached to it." Lenora looked again at the photograph of Isolde's hand. Callan had cropped away almost everything except the ring and his own shoulder. He had reduced a lifetime into a symbol he thought he could borrow. Thaddeus turned to another clause. If any officer or family representative used restricted trust property to support a private commercial claim, the trustees could issue an immediate review notice. Once delivered, every delegated authority connected to the claim would be suspended until the board and trust completed an independent examination. Suspended, Lenora repeated. Not terminated, Thaddeus said. Not punished. Paused. The distinction mattered. Lenora did not want a theatrical victory built on anger. She wanted the truth preserved long enough that Callan could not bury it beneath influence, charm, or another polished presentation. Merritt opened the access records for Voss Meridian's financing archive. Callan had requested files normally restricted to Lenora, the chief financial officer, and the audit committee. He used an executive override that had remained active from a project completed 18 months earlier. The permission should have expired. It had not. I can revoke it today, Merritt said. Lenora rested her fingertips on the edge of the table. Outside, the first light reached the harbor, turning the water silver. Not yet. Both men looked at her. She explained the gala, the investors, and Callan's planned announcement. She did not mention Sabine's message or the hotel invoices. Those belonged to the marriage. This belonged to the company. If I stop him before he speaks, Lenora said, he will call it a misunderstanding. He will say the language was unfinished. He will say the ring was only decorative. Thaddeus watched her with the same patient expression he had worn through Isolde's final months. And if he uses it publicly, then the record will be complete. Merritt closed the tablet. You are asking us to let him proceed. I am asking you to observe, Lenora replied. She slid the presentation back into the folder and stood. The gardenias beneath her mother's portrait had begun to open in the warmth of the lobby. Their scent followed her toward the door. Before she left, Thaddeus spoke her name. Your mother added one final instruction regarding the ring. Lenora turned. He placed a sealed page on the table. She wrote that the trust should protect the object only until you were ready to protect the meaning. Lenora looked at the envelope but did not take it. Keep it for now, she said. Then she walked into the brightening lobby, already knowing that the ring was no longer the heart of the matter. It was the evidence Callan had chosen to place in plain sight. For the next 11 days, Lenora did nothing that looked like revenge. She attended breakfast meetings, reviewed occupancy forecasts, signed renovation approvals, and answered Callan's questions with the same measured calm she had used for years. At home, she left the lilies on the kitchen counter until their white petals curled inward and the water turned cloudy. Callan noticed neither the flowers nor the silence between them. He was too occupied with the gala, the investors, and the future he had already begun describing as inevitable. Each morning, Lenora arrived at Voss Meridian before 7. Merritt met her in a small conference room on the executive floor, where they reviewed every account, permission, and document connected to Callan's proposed acquisition. Nothing was altered without a record. Nothing was removed. Merritt created duplicate archives, secured the original presentation, and placed a hold on automatic deletion across the financing system. The security director preserved footage from the private elevator, the hallway outside Lenora's home office, and the room containing the safe. The cameras showed Callan entering at 2:17 in the morning, remaining inside for 6 minutes, and leaving with a small dark box beneath his jacket. Lenora watched the recording once. She did not replay it. The angle revealed no hesitation in his movements. He knew where the safe was. He knew the code. He knew she was asleep less than 40 feet away. Thaddeus prepared the trust review notice, but left the delivery time blank. It contained no accusations, only facts. Unauthorized possession of restricted property, unauthorized use of trust imagery, and possible misrepresentation of delegated family authority. Each phrase had been weighed carefully. Lenora refused language that sounded theatrical. The record should speak before we do, she said. She asked Auden Voss, her cousin and curator of the family collection, to attend the gala as a representative of the trust. Auden understood immediately when Lenora mentioned the ring, but he did not ask for details. He only requested that a conservation case and secure transport pouch be available backstage. Lenora also expanded the guest list. 2 independent directors who had planned to join by video received personal invitations. The chair of the audit committee was given a seat near Merritt. Representatives from the financing group were placed close enough to hear Callan's remarks without relying on edited recordings later. Thaddeus would stand near the rear entrance, carrying the signed notice in a plain black portfolio. Callan interpreted the growing attendance as proof of his influence. At dinner 3 nights before the event, he described the ballroom layout while scrolling through photographs on his phone. This will be the night people finally understand what I have built, he said. Lenora folded her napkin beside her plate. What have you built? Callan looked up, briefly surprised by the question. Then he smiled. A future large enough for all of us. His phone lit with Sabine's name before he could explain who belonged inside that word. He turned the screen face down. Lenora noticed the reflex, the casual secrecy, the confidence that she would remain polite enough not to challenge him. She asked whether the final presentation had been approved by the board. Callan took a sip of wine. The board will approve it when they see the room. That is not how approval works. It is how leadership works, he replied. Lenora held his gaze for a moment, then returned to her dinner. He mistook the end of the conversation for agreement. On the afternoon of the gala, she visited the ballroom before the florist finished. Workers carried white roses across the floor while technicians tested the chandeliers and adjusted the projection screen behind the stage. Lenora stood at the center of the empty room and imagined where Callan would place himself, where Sabine would stand, and where the cameras would turn when the ring appeared. She asked the event manager to keep the stage lighting bright after the announcement and to preserve all official video without edits. Then she selected a position near the left side of the ballroom, close enough to be seen and far enough that Callan would believe she had withdrawn. Before leaving to dress, Lenora sent one message to Thaddeus, Merritt, and Auden. No speeches. No interruptions. Wait for my signal. The replies arrived within seconds. That evening, as she fastened diamond earrings beneath the soft light of her dressing room, Callan entered without knocking. He adjusted his cuff links in the mirror and told her the navy gown looked severe. Lenora smoothed the lace at her waist. It is appropriate, she said. Callan leaned closer to his reflection, satisfied with himself. Tonight changes everything. Lenora picked up her evening bag and met his eyes in the mirror. Yes, she said. It does. The ballroom reached its brightest moment just after 9, when the orchestra softened and the projection screen behind the stage turned black. Conversations faded beneath the chandeliers. Waiters stepped back from the tables. Callan moved toward the microphone with Sabine beside him, her pale gown catching the warm light each time she shifted. The sapphire ring remained on her finger, angled outward as though even her hand had been rehearsed. Lenora stood near the left side of the room exactly where she had planned, one hand resting against her evening bag, the other holding a champagne glass she had not touched. From that distance, she could see Merritt seated near the front, Thaddeus at the rear entrance, and Auden beside the museum trustee from Charleston. None of them looked at her. That was part of the arrangement. Callan began with gratitude. He thanked the investors, praised the board, and spoke about growth with the polished ease of a man who had practiced every pause. Then the first slide appeared. A photograph of the original Voss Hotel filled the screen, followed by images of newer properties rising along the coast. He spoke of tradition, courage, and the responsibility of carrying a family vision forward. Each word sounded carefully borrowed. Lenora watched him claim the language of people whose sacrifices he had never fully understood. When the image of Isolde appeared, the room grew still. She was standing outside the Charleston Hotel in a cream suit, one hand lifted against the sunlight. The sapphire ring was visible. Callan glanced toward Sabine and smiled. Legacy, he said, only matters when someone is brave enough to move it into the future. Sabine looked down at the ring with shining eyes. A few guests nodded. Others remained motionless. Callan advanced to the acquisition proposal. He described the resort group, the projected returns, and the private management structure that would place him at the center of the expansion. On the screen, the words "full Voss family support" appeared beneath the company crest. Lenora felt no surprise. She had seen the slide weeks earlier. What changed the room was the confidence with which he said it aloud. Tonight, Callan continued, I am proud to confirm that this opportunity carries the complete backing of the family, the company, and the legacy assets that have guided us for generations. Merritt lowered his eyes to the document in front of him. Thaddeus opened the black portfolio. Auden's expression did not change. Callan lifted Sabine's hand, drawing attention to the sapphire. This ring represents more than history, he said. It represents trust in what comes next. Cameras flashed. Sabine smiled through tears, unaware that the sentence had just completed the record. Callan looked toward Lenora at last. It was only a brief glance, but she understood what he wanted her to do. Smile. Applaud. Confirm everything by remaining visible and agreeable. The room followed his gaze. Lenora felt hundreds of eyes settle on her. She raised the champagne glass slightly, not high enough to become a toast, and held it there for one quiet second. Callan's shoulders loosened. He thought she had surrendered. Then Lenora lowered the glass, placed it on a passing tray, and opened her evening bag. Her phone rested inside with the screen already prepared. One message waited in the draft field. Activate the trust review. No accusation. No explanation. Only the instruction they had agreed upon. Her thumb hovered over the screen while Callan continued speaking about unity, authority, and the future he believed already belonged to him. Sabine turned her hand beneath the lights, displaying the ring to another row of cameras. Lenora looked once at the faint scratch beside the sapphire, the small mark her mother had chosen not to erase. She remembered Isolde's voice in the sunroom. Never let anyone use it to speak for you. Callan reached the final line of his announcement. This is the beginning of a new Voss era. Lenora pressed send. Across the ballroom, 3 phones vibrated almost at once. Merritt looked down. Thaddeus removed the signed notice from his portfolio. Auden stepped quietly toward the side entrance where the conservation case waited. Callan heard none of it. The applause had already begun, warm and obedient, filling the room around him. Lenora closed her bag and remained still beneath the chandeliers. Her expression did not change. She had not interrupted his speech, challenged his authority, or asked anyone to believe her pain. She had simply allowed him to finish speaking, then made certain every word would finally belong to the record. The applause ended unevenly. A few guests lowered their hands first, then others followed as Merritt rose from his seat near the front. He did not approach the stage quickly. He simply buttoned his jacket, lifted the folder in front of him, and waited until Callan noticed. The projection screen behind the stage went dark. Callan glanced toward the control booth, then back at the room with a practiced smile. "We appear to be having a technical issue," he said. "No," Merritt replied. His voice carried without effort. "The presentation has been paused by order of the audit committee." A murmur moved across the ballroom. Sabine's smile faded at the edges. Callan stepped away from the microphone and looked toward Lenora, but she remained beside the left wall, still and composed beneath the warm light. Thaddeus began walking forward from the rear entrance, the black portfolio held at his side. With each step, the room seemed to rearrange itself around him. Conversation stopped. Cameras lowered. Even the orchestra remained silent. Callan's expression tightened. "This is neither the time nor the place," he said. Thaddeus stopped several feet from the stage. The time and place were selected when restricted trust property was used to support a public commercial representation. Sabine looked down at the sapphire ring. Her fingers curled slightly, as if the stone had suddenly become heavier. Callan turned toward her. "Do not worry. This is a family misunderstanding." Thaddeus opened the portfolio. The Voss Legacy Trust has issued a formal review notice concerning unauthorized possession of protected property, unauthorized use of trust imagery, and unauthorized claims of family backing. He handed one copy to Merritt and held another toward Callan. Callan did not take it. Merritt continued in the same calm tone. "Effective immediately, your delegated signing authority for the proposed acquisition is suspended pending independent review. Access to financing archives and restricted company records has been revoked. All negotiations connected to the acquisition are on hold." The words were not loud, yet they traveled farther than any speech Callan had given that evening. Sabine looked from Merritt to Callan. "You said the board approved everything." Callan lowered his voice. "They will. This is procedural. You said the ring was yours." The question came softly, but the nearest microphones caught it. Callan's face changed for the first time. Not guilt. Calculation. He glanced toward Lenora again, as though she might still rescue him from the room he had built. She did not move. Thaddeus addressed Sabine with measured courtesy. "The ring belongs to the trust. You are not being accused of taking it, but it must be returned to the authorized custodian tonight." Sabine stared at the sapphire. The joy that had filled her face minutes earlier gave way to confusion, then humiliation. She turned to Callan. "You told me Lenora had given it back to the family." He said nothing. That silence answered more than denial could have. Sabine slowly pulled the ring from her finger. Her hands trembled, and for one moment the sapphire caught the chandelier light between them. Auden approached carrying a small conservation case lined with dark velvet. Sabine placed the ring inside without looking at Lenora. Auden closed the case, secured the clasp, and signed the receipt Thaddeus offered him. The gesture was quiet, administrative, final. Around the ballroom, guests began to understand that the proposal had not been a private scandal. It had been used as proof of authority that did not exist. One of the investors stood and asked whether any commitment had been binding. Merritt answered that no funds had been transferred and no contracts would proceed until the review concluded. Another board member requested that official recordings of the announcement be preserved. Callan stepped down from the stage. "Lenora," he said, finally speaking her name without confidence. She met his eyes across the room. "You could have discussed this with me." Lenora's expression remained unchanged. "I asked how you opened the safe." Callan looked away first. Sabine stood beside the empty place where the ring had been, her hand bare, her face pale beneath the ballroom lights. She seemed smaller now, not because anyone had humiliated her, but because the story she had been given had collapsed in public. Lenora did not smile. She did not approach the stage or reclaim the room with a speech. She simply watched Auden carry the sealed case toward the side entrance while Thaddeus documented every step. The ring was no longer on Sabine's hand. Callan's authority was no longer assumed. And without raising her voice, Lenora had made the entire ballroom see the difference between possession and ownership. The review lasted 4 months. It did not end with shouting, ruined careers, or the kind of spectacle Callan had once mistaken for power. It ended in conference rooms, signed statements, archived emails, and a sequence of facts that no polished explanation could erase. The board concluded that Callan had used Voss family imagery, restricted trust property, and outdated executive access to support a transaction he had no authority to represent as approved. He was not stripped of anything that legally belonged to him. He simply lost the permissions, titles, and influence that had existed only because Lenora had once trusted him. His resignation arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. The divorce followed with the same restraint. Lenora asked for no public apology and issued no statement about Sabine. She protected her company, separated her assets, and allowed the court to divide what the marriage had actually created. Callan kept what was his. The Voss name, the trust, and the authority to speak for either were not included. Sabine cooperated with the investigation after turning over messages showing that Callan had told her the marriage was already over and the ring had been released by the family. Her branding contract was canceled because of the undisclosed conflict, but Lenora did not ask the board to punish her beyond that. Some betrayals were deliberate. Others began inside a lie someone desperately wanted to believe. 1 year after the gala, the restored Charleston Hotel opened a small permanent exhibition in the original library. Auden designed it without velvet ropes or dramatic lighting. At the center stood a clear conservation case holding Isolde's sapphire ring beside the bridge loan documents that had once saved the company. The narrow scratch near the setting remained visible. Lenora had refused every suggestion to polish it away. On the wall behind the case hung a simple photograph of Isolde outside the first Voss property, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her expression tired but unbroken. Beneath it were her words, "Legacy is not what people inherit. It is what they refuse to surrender." The exhibition opened on a Saturday morning to 20 scholarship recipients from across South Carolina. They were young women studying finance, hospitality, architecture, and law, each funded through a new program bearing Isolde's name. Lenora stood among them in a cream suit, answering questions about her mother without turning grief into legend. She spoke about unpaid invoices, failed negotiations, long nights, and the quiet discipline required to begin again after someone underestimated you. One student stopped before the ring and asked why Lenora did not wear it. The room fell softly silent. Lenora looked through the glass at the sapphire, no longer seeing Callan's hand or Sabine's tears beneath the ballroom chandeliers. She saw her mother at the kitchen window. She saw the chipped coffee cup, the folded linen towel, and the woman who had taught her that value did not depend on being displayed. "Because it is doing more good here," Lenora said. The student nodded and returned to the group. Later, after the visitors had gone, Thaddeus joined Lenora beside the case and handed her the sealed page she had left unopened a year earlier. Isolde's final instruction contained only a few lines. "The ring may remind you of me, but it must never become the place where you keep your courage. That belongs in you." Lenora read the words twice, then folded the letter along its original crease. Outside the library windows, afternoon lights stretched across the harbor, brightening the water beyond the old hotel. She placed the letter in the exhibition drawer beneath the trust documents, not hidden, but protected. Callan had used the ring to make another woman appear chosen. Lenora had used one silent decision to prove that no one could choose her value for her. She did not win her husband back. She reclaimed the voice he had tried to borrow, the legacy he had tried to wear, and the life she had almost forgotten was entirely her own.